date is the 1960s. One important event in the 1960s is the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War and U.S. involvement began in 1964 and ended in 1975. The Vietnam War is a conflict between the communist government of North Vietnam and its ally, the United States. The United States entered Vietnam with the purpose of preventing a communist takeover of the region, but it failed. Another important event in the 1960s was the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis happened in October 16, 1962 through October 24. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the moment during the Cold War when the U.S. and Soviet Union came close to nuclear war. Communications and miscommunications played out between the White House and the Kremlin, which made it interesting. In 1968, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty was signed and meant that the two superpowers promised not to supply nuclear technology to other countries. Furthermore, the U.S. and Soviet Union space race was another important event in the 1960s. The USA and Soviet Union raced to see who could do more in space because the USA was fighting a Cold War with Russia. Americans were worried that Russia would have better technology than the U.S. because they already sent the first satellite and first man to space. On July 20, 1969, Americans landed a spacecraft on the moon and walked on the moon, which caused the U.S. to fall ahead of the Soviet Union. Next is the pop culture trends in the 1960s. The first report on how smoking was bad for you was published in 1964 after reviewing more than 7,000 articles in the medical area. The Surgeon General concluded that smoking caused lung cancer. The first Super Bowl was held on January 15, 1967. It was against the National Football League and the American Football League. It was hosted in Los Angeles, California at the Los Angeles Memorial Festival. A hippie was a person who went against the accepted society, turning to a different lifestyle during the 1960s. They liked communal living, mind-altering drugs, and bright clothing styles. Hippies advocated for non-violence, love, and they promoted openness of different lifestyles. They also protested against the Vietnam War. Next is three important people of the 1960s. Marilyn Monroe was an important person during the 1960s. Marilyn Monroe was an American actress, model, and singer. She became the world's most enduring iconic figures and is remembered by her representation of Hollywood and her tragic personal and professional struggles with the religious faith. On August 4, 1962, she died at the age of 36 from an overdose. Her death was claimed a probable suicide. Another important person was John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was also an important person during the 1960s. John F. Kennedy served as the 35th President of the United States from 1961 until his assassination in 1963. He was the youngest person to become president. He worked to prevent nuclear war, and his commitment to peace is still remembered till this day. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated as he rode in a car through Dallas, Texas. Martin Luther King Jr. was also an important person during the 1960s. Martin Luther King Jr. was the leader of the American Civil Rights Movement in the United States during the 1950s and 60s. He organized a number of peaceful protests, and in 1953, King and other civil rights groups worked together to organize the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, which attracted lots of people to protest for the civil and economic rights of Black Americans. The march influenced passages of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In 1964, Martin Luther King Jr. was awarded the 1964 Nobel Peace Prize. Moving on, we're going to talk about the important inventions of the 1960s. April 1, 1960, NASA launched its first weather satellite into orbit. This was an important invention because it allowed meteorologists to receive information about the weather conditions in space in real time. In 1965, James M. invented aspartame, which was also important. Aspartame is used to sweeten foods and beverages, including diet soda and other calorie drinks. This is an important invention because it helps us enjoy drinks. In 1968, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company showed using 911 as the National Emergency Service number. On February 1968, the first ever 911 call happened in Haleyville, Alabama. Now, we're going to talk about the fashion trends during the 1960s. People in the 1960s typically wore bell-bottom jeans, hipsters, and t-shirts. Floral patterns were everywhere, and the focus was on vibrancy and color. Miniskirts were also getting popular, and the hippies fashion was popular as well.
Groovy means cold.
Digger means to understand or agree with something.
It's a gas. It means fun and fun.
Mellow, relaxed.
Bad also.
Bummer, a disappointment situation.
Those were the slangs, the popular slang words of the 1960s.
How do you still believe?
The 1960s was a unique decade because the era was marked by important life-changing events like the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, counterculture movements, political assassinations, space race, and many more. It was the decade to change for the better. The 1960s made a big impact and made a mark on our world today.